all across space. All across time. Mysteries that we can't understand.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
Looking into the stories and those behind them. Welcome to UAP Insight Podcast.
All right, Rao, how you doing today?
I'm really good, Ray. I'm glad to be on your podcast.
I'm
very
glad to have
excited.
you.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, so you are a PhD scientist, a former employee or contractor with NOAA as well as NASA. Is that correct?
Yeah, as a USDA, so we were kind of working together, especially with NOAA and NASA on the satellite end, and USDA is more on the food security commodity side. So I do different things as time goes on. So after I retired, I moved on to writing books on the moon. So this is all self-taught,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's,
So when you were with NOAA and NASA and USDA, I understand you were PhD in meteorology, so
yeah.
you're kind of more studying the climatology of
Mhm.
Earth at that point.
Yeah, basically, the PhD program is just they teach you to fish. So different things, it's a training process for you to learn and go on. It's not catch all. I mean, you have to learn new things if you have that kind of a basic background on how to do research. So that's helped me a lot in doing different projects. I worked on, climate change. I worked on food security, commodities, so many other different, aspects. So that allows you to kind of do different things in life. If you stick to only one, then you get outdated. The priorities of the government changes or whatever. So you have to be able to be dynamic and move on with new things. Otherwise, you'll have a short career.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what would you consider the most difficult transition during that period, from one scientific part to the next?
Yeah, I think while I was working with NOAA, I was basically developing satellite products for them. Then they asked me to also help with the instrumentation of the satellites, like the evening GO satellite, you see the weather maps, satellite cloud images, and all that. That's the GO satellite. And so we were involved in monitoring the progress of the GO satellites that NASA was building with us. So they sent me back to school for a couple of semesters to John Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, which is the one of the leading rocket science schools in the country or world, actually. So I learned a lot about rocket science, rockets, space programs, everything from the space shuttle on to what are the modern things are. I mean, I understand a lot of the elements that go into those programs. So once you're familiar with that, then you will understand what Elon Musk is doing or what Boeing is doing or Jeff Bezos is doing. It's easy to comprehend. It's like working on one car, then you can work on different cars. It's the skill you adapt or learn. So
Yeah, it's I think that being in that kind of a position would kind of make you a jack of all trades
yeah,
in the scientific community, especially in the applied physics of
yeah,
it, because one day you're working on trying to come out with a new
mhm,
climatological model to help you better predict how a flood is going to affect a
mhm,
specific area, and the next you're trying to figure out how to get the propulsion systems in a
mhm.
like a Saturn V rocket to work
Yeah,
properly.
yeah. It's challenging, but it's very rewarding too. I mean, not financially, but mentally, intellectually. So that's, and also I think what it taught me was to go back and read the religious books, because there's so much information in them that people tend to ignore because it's not fashionable. But if you look at some of the great scientists, like Einstein or even von Braun or Oppenheimer, they all looked at religious significance, looking for clues in religious books, scientific clues. And then I think Einstein found a lot in some of the Hindu publications. I think, if I might say so, I think Adolf Hitler was very intellectual in digging those things out. He knew where the meat was. So instead of going for jewels and all that kind of stuff, he went for these Vedic books, Vedic manuals that are written in Sanskrit. They took them to Germany, had them translated, and that helped some of their rocket work and a few other things. Gravitation. They actually acquired a white paper written during the times of Emperor Ashoka that was on gravity. How do you overcome gravitational force? Things like that. So they had ideas of what to do. Even if you look at the biblical things, there are so many significant examples where they have spacecraft, where the God is coming in, talking to Noah from above. It's all doing from a spacecraft. So these gods, so when they came in different periods in human evolution, they were using spaceships, and these were actually parked on the moon, and then they were coming back and forth. They were probably using bigger spacecraft to come from whichever galaxy they were coming from, but then they
Yeah.
used the smaller spacecraft to shuttle back and forth between the moon and the Earth. Now, if you look at the modern day UAPs, that's exactly what they're doing. They're parked on the moon, and they're coming and kind of having fun, scaring a few pilots off or what have you.
Yeah.
It's just like a little game. They're having fun. So that's why I looked at religion, because I like not only a little bit of Hinduism, a little bit of Christianity, a little bit of Judaism, to understand the commonalities in all these things. And one of the commonalities that emerged was giants. Every religion talks about giants. And if you look at modern history, they just crush the whole concept. They don't encourage it at all. But then if you look at the yuga cycles, they clearly tell you which periods the giants come in and which period, the cycles, the human characteristics are dumbed down with each cycle. So that the first part of the cycle is we have the largest human beings, and then the second is slightly smaller, the third even smaller, and the fourth, which we are in right now, is the smallest of the four subcycles. So why they do it, I don't know. Basically, they're using some sort of genetic switching system to dumb down these characteristics. So sometimes what happens is you may have genes coming in from the previous yuga. Like that's why you have maybe athletes who are 7'5" or 7'7" because they have traces of that genetic material in them. Some people may be very short. These are all leftover from the previous yugas. So in that sense, these Puranas or whatever are explaining things that modern science is not able to explain.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense from kind of a Hindu standpoint, from what I've been able to read about it. And I think that the Hindus had kind of a really good way to categorize everything. So
Mhm.
for people who aren't familiar, can you kind of explain the yuga for everybody?
Yeah, if you can look at this slide I'm showing, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, I just picturized the yuga cycles. Now, what happens is each yuga cycle, like there are four of them. The first is the Satya Yuga, the second is the Treta Yuga, third is the Dwapara Yuga, and the fourth, is, which we are in right now, is known as the Kali Yuga. So the time periods keep diminishing. The first is 1.728 million years. The second is 1.296. Third is 0.864. And the one we are in is 0.432 million years. So what happens is the cycle goes this way, and each successive subdivision, the genetic downsizing takes place. So where the age, the intelligence, the height keep coming down. If you look at the Darwinian type of evolution, it is linear. In other words, it should increase with time. According to the Hindu Vedic system, it's reversed. So this is where Hitler was trying to get to. The superior race is right here in the Satya Yuga. And then it kind of dumps down and down and down to finally where we are. This is the more stable Mr. Rogers type environment to live in. And then it keeps deteriorating as we go along. And then when you're in the final stage of Kali Yuga, it's really bad. In other words, there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of cheating, that sort of thing. That basically moral breakdown of society happens. This is predicted. These cycles, are 4.32 million years, and each one is called a Mahayuga. So far we have gone through 28 cycles in this time of the universe. And so, like for example, if you take Ramayana, it took place in the 24th Yuga cycle. The Mahabharata took place in the 28th cycle. If Christianity, Jesus was born in the 28th cycle. Buddha was born in the 28th cycle. So all these happened during those times. So the ancient Puranas tell you exactly where each of those gods will appear on earth. And these cycles keep repeating, not even thousands, millions of times. So that the same, it's like a high school, you have the same textbooks being repeated every year, the same Bible, same Ramayana, Mahabharata keep repeating. They use this cookie cutter approach with each cycle. So there's some, I don't know, alien gods or ancient gods who are
Yeah.
doing this. But anyway, it's important to know because based on these cycles, after a certain number of cycles, there's continuous flooding on Earth. like what you saw on Noah's Ark and things like that. So what happens is that a manvantara is like 71 cycles is called a manvantara, about 307 million years. And the end of each manvantara, the earth is flooded for about 1.73 million years. So this is repetitive cycles. And the whole lifespan on planet Earth lasts for about 4.32 billion years, after which the darkness sets in and then the whole cycle repeats again. So that's, in a nutshell, the Yuga cycles. These are very important because if you want to know how, this is basically telling us that there were intelligent civilizations before us in the past. I don't know whether it was the previous Yuga, Mahayuga, or the 25th or 12th, I can't tell. But this cycle explains that this is possible. In other words, people who are like 30, 32 feet tall in this Yuga, they're about 20 feet tall here. So if you look at those megalithic structures around the earth, you can now see how people in these Yugas could have built them, because there's a much longer time frame. It's 1.72 million years, whereas we have only 432,000. So it's very possible that these giants in these two sub-cycles were able to build advanced technologies at some point. We cannot rule that out. If you look at some of the Google News, you will see they're always finding Stone Age things that are 1,000,000 years old and so forth. So there were, yes, civilizations long before ours, and some of these may have gone to the moon and settled. So we cannot attribute everything to alien technology. This is, some of these could have been our ancient ancestors who built them, technologically advanced, and then when they had some sort of asteroid strike or whatever, they moved to the moon and settled there. So what I'm saying is, not in addition to the aliens, there's also ancient ancestors who might have been responsible for things like the pyramids and all these megalithic structures. So that's how this Yuga cycles fit into the lunar program.
Okay. So in the Hindu texts, is there ever any records of beings or individuals who are able to traverse between the different Mahayugas? Or is it just completely a clean slate at the beginning of every cycle?
It's usually a clean slate unless you are part of the Hindu pantheon of gods. In other words, if you have divine ancestry, then yeah, you live longer than that. Because what happens is, if you're looking at space, time travel, these people are traveling from distant galaxies like Ursa Major or wherever. So by the time they come, we may be dead and gone, but they're only like 1 day or 2 days in their lifespan because of this time contraction, all that stuff. So that's the link. So yeah, I mean, people like you and me will not, unless you are born again, we won't be able to see all these different things. The other thing that these religious Puranas tell you is what is possible. In other words, they will say, okay, there are multiverses, there are parallel universes, but they won't tell you how to get there. They'll say, oh, you got to wait till you come back to this Yuga to really understand all that stuff. You may not have the mental capacity to absorb all that, technology.
Yes, especially if you're coming in at kind of one of the later yugas, like especially during the Kali Yuga,
Yeah.
because of the way you're describing it. It's, we're so diminished by the end of the cycle that we wouldn't be able to comprehend what
Hmm.
those at the beginning of the cycle were capable of.
Yeah, like I was reading about these Vaimanika Sastra, where the commander of the spaceship was supposed to remember something like 10,000 passages through the universe. They were like wormholes. There were also wormholes for traveling across the earth. So they remember all that stuff. It's like a supercomputer stuck in your head, so you don't need all these. If you look at the old time pilots, they're carrying these big briefcases with books in them. So, it's technology. I mean, you cannot rule out that, because just because we don't understand that technology doesn't mean it is a BS.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. So let's kind of get more before we get into your kind of life story a little bit more. I
Mhm.
kind of just wanted to play a video from the most recent moon landing that was successful,
Sure.
from the Firefly
Firefly.
Blue Ghost landing.
Mhm.
So let's go ahead and play that real quick.
Yeah.
Together, we created a moment in history.
All right.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on seeing kind of the first 4K footage from the moon?
That's awesome. I think they were able to perfectly replicate the Apollo program, and with probably at a much more economical way. It's really very impressive that we have more than one group now that can do things like that. Instead of just maybe SpaceX, you have Firefly. That's what NASA was trying to do, is to diversify suppliers, so that in this business you have to have more than one supplier, because the failure rates are high. We don't know why it happened. It'll work in one situation and the next it won't. I don't know why. More research is needed to figure that out. Simple things like pyro boards don't work. I don't know why it won't work, but it has happened. That I think that ISRO had a problem with one of the pyro boards not working, so that the valve didn't open and the oxidizer couldn't flow, and the whole satellite is kind of drifting for a while unless they do something else to correct it.
Yeah. So let's kind of get into your history with the moon. I understand, when you were a kid back in
Mhm.
the 60s,
Yeah.
you first saw the Apollo program. So kind of take me through your early years. Where were you? How did you see it? Kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, I was back in India at that time, still a student. So my parents didn't have televisions, TV or telephones or even refrigerator for that matter. So you had to cook everything every day and everything eat fresh. So from that, we kind of slowly transitioned into what it is modern day now. So at the age of, I think around 20, I came to the US, 22, to study meteorology, PhD in meteorology. I went to school in Oklahoma, which is a very well-known school in meteorology. Oklahoma, Penn State, they're very well-known schools in meteorology. So I attended there. It was a nice experience. And then after that, I went to work I was a contractor for NOAA through the university system. And then they eventually absorbed me into NOAA to run a lot of their food security programs for USAID. So I managed a lot of the USAID food security programs in Africa, the Middle East, South America, which heavily used the satellite data. That was NOAA was operating the satellites, and we were giving that data away and training them on how to use that in their own countries. So that was helpful, I think, to people who were willing to learn from that. So I think a lot of the programs that USAID did were very helpful. There might have been a few countries that might have abused, but that is at the political level. It's not at the science level. What the scientists do is just implement programs with the money that actually is given to them. So yeah, it has pros and cons, but you know.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed doing a lot of that. Then I went into commodity forecasting for USDA. I don't know if you saw the movie Trading Places.
It's been a while, but yeah.
Yeah. So that's exactly where I was working, is providing estimates on a monthly basis in a very confidential environment. So, your phone will be tapped, everything, your bank account, they will know what you're doing so that you don't benefit from any of this. It's done very discreetly without any public scrutiny there, so that's impressive. Once a month, you put out numbers on what the soybean production is going to be, what the wheat production globally by country. So that information is used a lot in commodity markets. Farmers speculate on that. They have cell phones. They're always calling their brokers and taking positions. So that's a useful service that the public benefit from, not only from USDA, but the NOAA that provides a lot of the satellite data that supports all of these activities. It's very, they have a lot of synergy in what they do. And NASA, of course, does all the research in developing those instruments, the sensors. So it's all a big family.
Yeah, that sounds very interconnected, and I mean,
Mhm.
I think that every agency should be working together in order
Yeah.
create the best possible data for scientists such as yourself, or like even like Tim Gallaudet,
Hmm.
former Rear Admiral,
Yes, you can
head
know,
of
yeah.
NOAA at one point. Were you working at NOAA during the time that he was running it,
Could
or was
have
that?
been because we had a lot of the Navy personnel there, working with us. I don't remember, but yeah, it could have. That was the time when I developed that flooding product based on the passive microwave sensor. I think that Clinton and Albert Gore, they used that and they described the flooding in Iowa. So that was a big 15 seconds of fame for me. But, it's part of what you contribute. If it is useful to others, then yeah, it's satisfying. It's not financially a big deal, but it's personally as a scientific accomplishment. Yes, it would. So yeah.
Yeah, so let's kind of move forward, and you're just retiring, deciding to start researching into
Mhm.
UFOs on the moon.
Yes.
And so what was the trigger point for you to start researching that, of all the things that someone with your background could have?
This NASA has a lot of databases in the lunar program databases. In the evenings, I just sit and browse through them to see what is going on. Because of my experience working with different satellites, I was able to very easily pick up issues or problems or interesting features in the imagery. Normally, a person will miss all that. It's like being a criminologist. You go to a crime scene, you may look at stuff that most people will just walk over or things like that. So it's the same thing in science. If you're experienced with 30 years or whatever, looking at this data, you can easily identify features that are interesting. And I could pick them up in like a few seconds. I was looking at thousands of images that NASA has, and I would just and look at those very quickly. That's what I did in my job. I used to look at a lot of Landsat images on the US, and you'd be like looking at 200 scenes in a week. There's a lot of money there, but yeah, we could see a lot of scenes, and I learned a lot from that. And that helped me understand what I was looking at in the moon. Now, what problem is, there's always this shroud of secrecy about UFOs, especially in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So they was always trying to explain spuriously what those things were. They would say, oh, these are blemishes. It's not a blemish. I mean, it's crystal clear what it is. And a blemish may be like an astronaut drops a can of Coke or something, is on the lens. Yeah, there are a few cases like that, I agree. But other things are not blemishes. They are real events. I've got pictures, you saw that monstrous face on the moon. I mean, it is
Yeah.
real. It's not what NASA claimed was, oh, yeah, when we were reprocessing, this projector was sparking and all this started. No, if it was sparking, the daggone film would catch fire,
Oh, yeah,
So,
especially back then. It was, I mean, I don't know what it was about the material that the film was made of, but it
yeah,
was just
acetate.
extremely flammable.
Yeah. So I had to kind of debug, or what do you call that? Yeah, in those claims. There were a lot of, if you look at the conspiracy theories, they were saying, oh, NASA recorded everything on the hangars because there were multiple shadows. Yeah, the multiple shadows part was correct, but the location of the NASA hangar was wrong. The venue was actually the moon. There was more than one source of light appearing on the moon that was causing these multiple, shadows. So things like that, people don't understand, and they kind of come to conclusions. So NASA is okay because you're debunking it anyway, so they don't want you to know the real facts. So you're better off kind of going on a tangent and barking up a wrong tree. So,
Yeah, because I know, I mean, if I understand this correctly, the sources of the multiple shadows on the moon is not only from the sun, but also from the sun's reflection off of the earth, as well as
mhm.
reflections off of like the sides of, the outer edges of craters that, can create upwards of, a dozen different light sources.
Yeah, look at this scene. Can you see that the sixth panel?
Yeah.
This is Apollo 17, and they took pictures. The important thing is the landscape is not changing. It's very what is happening is this drone is moving from the northeast slowly. It nothing there. It started appearing, then it became bigger, and then it started moving northwest, and then it's northwest. And then what they do, the way the drones operate is they have some sort of a focusing mechanism. They are working tandem so that they're able to narrow the beam or broaden the beam, like these flashlights you have, some of them that you can pull and push to change the swath of the light. That's exactly what they're doing here. They're also able to change the speed of light, which is even more mysterious. I've seen examples where you can actually, the astronaut took a picture where the beam comes and is reflected and it's captured on film. You cannot do that on Earth, unless you're really slowing the light or slowing down the film and then, whatever.
Yeah,
So,
and I understand that kind of the only way that we as humans have figured out how to slow down light even a little bit is through the use of diamonds,
yeah.
actually. Because from what I understand, just because of the composition of the structure, the photons kind of bounce around a lot more before actually exiting. So that would
Interesting.
also kind of, if one of these drones had kind of a laser focusing
Hmm.
or a photon focusing diamond, that would also allow it to refract the light through a different angle.
Yeah, I mean, just nice to know. Yeah, there's so many techniques, but this one here is clearly not the sun because on the moon, the sun can only move 0.51 degrees per hour. So if you're there like 50 hours, it will only move by 25 degrees in the what do you call that? The sun angle. This
Yeah.
angle.
So in comparison for someone on Earth, that's basically from sunrise until about 10 o'clock in the morning, correct?
Yeah, there's on the moon it's around 29 days. So if you're watching sunrise to sunset, it'll be like, it's 14.75 days and then it repeats. So that the cycle is pretty long. If you're landing on and trying to take observations, and pretty soon in 14 days, the sun goes down and then your solar cells die. If you're in the south polar regions, it's even smaller. The South Pole is more like the, the 90 degrees. Sweden, Copenhagen, Denmark, you get these sun staying for a longer time in the summer and shorter time in the winter. So it's the same thing, on the moon, you have to time your landing so that you land during the sunny side of the moon. Now, what happens in the South Pole, even though the light is very dim, that's why when that firefly thing was flying at certain points, it was very dark because the light is very low. There's no atmosphere on the moon, so there is no scattering of light. So it's like you're putting a flashlight in a vacuum. It's like old time comic books. The guy puts the flashlight and it's like a conical projection. It's the same thing. So that's why they need these aliens or whoever are on the moon that devise these light drones to help in the night period of the moon, so they can function or do their work. So they might have helped the astronauts out along the way. I mean, why would they do it? I mean, obviously, if they had ancestral connections, they may be willing to help human beings because they're from the same stock in a way. If you're purely alien, you may or may not be willing to help human beings, So that was my logic. So whoever they came across must have had some origins on Earth. Now, if I haven't put this in the book yet, and maybe upcoming book. You see, you've seen a lot of alien. I mean, looked at what do you call Neanderthal art. So you're not seeing alien art, right? So here's an example of alien art. This is on the moon, okay? This is taken by the lunar orbiters, 4 or 5, I don't remember. What they did was they used the features on the moon as like eyeballs or whatever. So they painted this stuff. This is all glass sheet. This glass sheet, you wouldn't believe. It's like, imagine the state of Missouri or Iowa having a glass sheet. And somebody painted this. This was visible from orbital heights of like 90 kilometers away. You can see this.
Oh wow! Yeah,
So
that's insane. And do we have the coordinates for this?
Yeah.
The lunar coordinates?
Yeah, I can give you that. I didn't put it in here. I don't know. Sometimes NASA likes it, sometimes they don't. Similarly, looks like a giraffe to me. Some people say it's a
to me that's kind of like a seahorse or something like that. I mean, it's almost kind of like a Rorschach test.
Yeah, the eyes and the mouth. So how would they know all that? Unless they were familiar with what was going on Earth, right? That means these people are traveling back and forth between the Earth and the moon to be able to draw those kind of things on the surface. Like if you look at this picture, this is they joined 2 sheets of glass. This is one sheet and there's another. It's likely tinted glass. I mean, who would think of putting glass on the moon with all those asteroids and all this debris striking? But they must have developed technology to withstand all that. Anyway, so this is the joint, and these are the craters in the South Pole. This is Helmholtz is over here, Bosino or whatever. This is here, and these are behind this a little bit. So what it is this glass. That means they were using it as like a biosphere, and people must have been living at some point and filled it with air, probably which they brought from the earth. And they had a lot of time on their hands, and they would do this kind of art. There's a lot of this stuff going on. So if you say, well, it's all BS, no, it's not. I mean, it's real. You got to see those glass sheets. I can show you scene after scene. This is stretching for thousands of miles. This itself this is like 120 kilometers long. So you got 100, 200, 300, 400 kilometers on one side, maybe 600 on this side. That's how big that sheet of glass is. This
Yeah,
is not,
that's massive.
yeah, I mean, this is beyond our dimension. It's probably made in some other dimension, like God says, let there be light. You would have said, let there be glass. And that big
Yeah,
huge
so
thing.
is this glass, is it just like your standard silicone glass that
Yeah,
like
I
would use
think
for the house, or would it be more of like a volcanic type glass?
because if you look at the lunar regolith, it has a lot of glass particles in it. So it's like, on Earth, you make bricks out of dirt. So the material is available. So on the moon, you have this lunar regolith, which has glass in it. So if you process it properly, you'll produce glass. So they might have done it on the moon in factories, I don't know, or brought it from somewhere, because they had this huge spacecraft. I mean, like they were like 12, 14 kilometers long. That is just unimaginable. But then if you look at the Yuga cycle, there were giants who were 30 feet tall. So if they were going to go in a spaceship, you need huge spaceships. So
Yeah, I definitely would feel extremely small if I were to step into something that's 14 kilometers long. I mean,
yeah,
that's
I mean, we're all familiar with Noah, right? He was like 10 feet, 8 to 10 feet tall, and they lived for 900 to 1,000 years. If you look at the table of ages I provided about Noah's family, they all lived around 900 to 1,000 years. That means they were part of the Dwapara Yuga, of some Yuga, from the Dwapara Yuga, where the heights match. 8 to 10 feet is the standard height. So those are real. I mean, these guys were there. They were real people. They were tall. So you cannot deny all that. So this is all hearsay. It's there in Judaism. It's there in Hinduism. It's there in Christianity. All these three religions cannot be wrong. There's convergence of evidence in this information. So we have to. I mean, I was looking at some picture in this museum in Ecuador that had this giant skeleton who was like 18 feet tall, in this museum. So these are real. I mean, what some of the museums tend to do or did in the past was they just ground up all those skeletons so that people wouldn't know they existed, which is kind of
Yeah, I remember hearing a story about the Smithsonian doing something similar in kind of the mid to late 18th or 19th century, the
yeah.
1800s.
Yeah, I mean, like things like that happen. Like if you look at the Grand Canyon, or you look at some parts of Peru, there was this ancient alien gods Hindu gods moving from Southeast Asia into U.S., and then into South America, and then maybe even they also went into the Antarctic region. And so now we are finding some of those, archaeological So yeah, they had these little vimanas or whatever they were using to travel across the planet, and a lot of the places on Earth have these megalithic structures. Not all of them are built by aliens. I mean, you got to give credit to some of the ancient ancestors for building some of those stuff. And also, the other problem is history has a history of lying about the exact timings. And they put everything, oh, it happened 1,000 years ago. So it'll look like 1000 AD was like an epitome of human civilization. No, it wasn't. It was no different from any other. If you look at Angkor Wat or this Borobudur temple in Indonesia, they were not built in this century. They've been existing for thousands of years, if not millions. We tend to kind of not bring that up.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I mean, there's kind of a very similar building structure across all of the different continents on Earth. You have pyramids in the United States, in
Yes.
South America, Central America, Asia, Europe, even like the Middle East, and obviously Africa. So during your studies of all of these religious scriptures from throughout the world, what was kind of the most common thread between like pyramidal shapes for function or purpose?
You mean the pyramids?
Yeah, just as an example.
Yeah, well, the technology may have been similar because the same people may have been building those. Because they had the ability to move across. Because I was looking at some of the quarries in Japan where they were cutting out these huge boulders, and they ended up in Peru and places like that. So how they could have done it was they would have transported in these big spaceships, from one part of the world to the other. So the technology was there. I mean, if you look at Peru, there's a lot of areas where there were spacecraft landing, like runways or whatever. So, you cannot just ignore or say that didn't happen. Yeah, it did happen. And it didn't happen with some medieval technology. The guy will say, oh, they had this, some sort of a chutney they apply, and then you drill those microscopic holes. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, that wouldn't have made any sense.
Yeah.
It's
Pumapunku or, Cusco, they were not made with chutneys. I mean, this is a real heavy duty equipment or something. They were giants, obviously. I showed that one of those pictures. They look like terraced farms in stone. I mean, imagine building such thing to do farming. I mean, if you were like a farmer, you'd be investing millions of dollars in producing tomatoes. Which is, they might have found it that way and adapted it for agriculture. Yeah, but I don't think they would have constructed that basically for agricultural purposes. There were no drainage holes. All the dirt can just flow down. So, I mean, we have to give credit to technology where it's due, but not all of it is alien. We have tendencies. A lot of books written as, oh, the ancient aliens did this, ancient aliens did that. No, they never mentioned that ancient ancestors did it. They could have done it. Because if you look at those Yuga cycles, there were times when they were much smarter than us. And it is true because even in our generation, you might have noticed that young girls are becoming smaller and smaller. They're much smaller than their mothers. It's part of this cycle where they're dumbing down the genetic things so that you become shorter and smaller. Eventually, it'll be like 4 feet tall by the end of the Kali Yuga. It's kind of scary, but that's the way it is. So
Yeah.
that was one of the things. Yeah. You look at some of this stuff I'll show you. You looked at a lot of these orbs in more recent sightings on Earth. They were talking about orbs in the UAPs. These are examples of orbs on the moon. This was in 1969. I was looking at the UFOs on the moon, and these are UFOs. These are not starlights. These are like 10, 12 kilometers long, maybe 4 kilometers in diameter. The humongous tubes that are capable of changing shape. Like these, you have these toys that change shape from automobiles to a big Hulk. So
like Transformers.
Transformer. These can change shape. This is a mothership of some sort. And if you look at this, I found this one on the moon. This is bright and long, and these orbs are servicing it or something. So if you look at more than one image in science, what you have to do is to look at more than one image to see different things. If you just look at one, you won't see the pattern. I looked at like 10 or 12 of these pictures before I came to this conclusion. And look at this one. They have this. This is like one of these guys trying to land on the moon, lunar surface. And this was captured. These scenes were captured by astronauts. So these are real. These are not fake. If you look at, this one, for example, it looks pretty normal. You think that was a star or a planet, but you blow that up, it looks like this.
That's like a falcon just like flapping its wings almost.
So the astronaut was smart enough to capture that. This was Apollo 17. I cannot tell you who did it, but NASA doesn't want you to tell for privacy reasons. You look at this. This. It looks like a cylindrical spacecraft, but then when you blow it up, it's like a wing shaped with pods on the end. This is definitely an UAP. These were there in 1972. I mean, this is not 2022 or 2024. I mean, this is 1972. This stuff was there. Nobody observed it. Nobody made this is another thing. You have this huge, long spacecraft, and this is this light drone. And that kind of spun around and made some holographic stuff for the astronauts. I think it was like Apollo 15. Yeah. Then another interesting thing is these spacecraft were photographed by the astronauts. I think they may be Apollo 14. When it was flying over the darker side of the moon, and the image is black, but then if you enhance it, all of a sudden these things show up. These look like, these are very huge, like 12, 14 kilometers long, capable of maybe like interstellar type travel. They can cable a very high speeds, probably maybe million miles an hour. Who knows?
Oh yeah, no, and I mean even if those were manipulated during
Yeah.
the period between when NASA took them and released them, it almost appears to me like that would have been a sign of something being removed from the image. So
Yeah, they've darkened it. So if you look at this rectangular stuff, this guy appeared on every Apollo mission. I don't know why, but they did. And you look at this scene, you can see that identical thing, and I enhanced the image, and you can see it very clearly. This is not some sort of a light related, you know, reflection or anything. And then you see this blue spacecraft. It's like, I blew it up and it looks more visible here. So the astronauts were doing their experiments, and this guy would show up, and these two would show up. And they had audio. I haven't had the time to gather all that, but the astronauts saying it, oh, yeah, this guy is showing up again. That was,
yeah, I remember hearing something actually just the other day.
yeah.
I started looking into the levitating moon dust
Mhm.
story that I hadn't ever heard about before watching the Blue Ghost landing on the moon. And they
Mhm.
started speaking about how they were planning on using one of the instruments on that craft to kind of study the phenomenon that was reported during the Apollo 14 mission, where at lunar sunset the moon dust levitates off of the surface due to some
Mhm.
sort of electrostatic charge. And I mean that's just do you think that that might be an example of something like the electrostatic charge and the levitating dust,
Yeah,
and
no, no,
that blue light almost being kind of like a electrostatic plasmoid or plasma
could
type
be, could be.
thing
I mean,
created?
for the whole moon, it kind of produces like a halo. And this one, yeah, when I blew it up, it's actually lighting up the dark matter. you
Okay.
know. So yeah, the technology there, I don't know, it's like a plasma type propellant in there. I don't know, but it's definitely a plume that is so wide, and it just came down like this, and the astronauts were there. I don't know. They were just watching them. So in a harmless way. I mean, they didn't harm them in any way. They were there all the time. So, like in the next slide, this is Apollo 14. They were able to come back to Earth. They were trying to dock with the command module Kitty Hawk, and the astronauts in the lunar module were took this picture. They found the same blue spacecraft again visiting them. So yeah, they knew these guys were there, and these guys knew these guys were there. So it was kind of a mutual cat and mouse game. They were friendly. Sometimes they would do things to amuse them or show off their technology, but they never harmed
Yeah.
them. So that's a good thing. So which means maybe they are our ancient ancestors or relatives of those, but that's nice to know that these things are there. And let's see. This is another the glass business. If you remember, I'm mentioning glass. Not only horizontal sheets of glass, there were vertical sheets as well. So this is like some sort of a cubic, rectangular type of thing. So what happens is you got to apply your physics. This is the wall, and if you look at this part, there's gaseous medium. That's why it's able to scatter the light. The light is actually being produced by a light drone behind this tower. And the lunar module is right here, and it's being blinded by the light. So it is interesting to me. Then this glass looks like a chest rook. This was probably millions of years old. So it's been there, you can see some wear and tear on this stuff. But basically what they're doing is they're enclosing it in some sort of a medium, air or whatever, which means there are some sort of people behind it living to create all this stuff. All this material may be coming in from the earth, and they're transporting air, they're transporting water, they're transporting seafood probably. You have these 20 tons of shrimp disappear. I mean, you can't blame the farmer when the fishermen were overfishing. These guys would have come on with a big spacecraft and dived into the ocean and, harvested all that stuff. So the reality is there's a lot of synergy between this Earth and the moon. They provide, for thousands of years, they've been providing water, air, food to people living on the moon. So my argument is, this has been going on for thousands, if not millions of years. So there's nothing to be fearful of or be, nothing to hide, because it's been there for millions of years. I mean, the Earth has been witnessing that. Now you just say, in the last 100 years after Roswell. No, this is going on for millions of years. It's not documented, but it is real. Now, if you look at this, I talked about the religious iconography. This is like 17.5 kilometers by 3.5 kilometers shape projected on the surface of the moon near the Kepler crater. So what happens is after the lunar module, whatever that was flying over the command module, it disappears. So this thing keeps bouncing in different parts of the moon. That means what? There is people either projecting from above or from below this humongous insignia. It looks like a United Airlines symbol there.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I mean, this is huge. It's not like small by any dimension. And it's identical. It's same thing comes over and over again. If you look at this one, they're vertical now. These blue and white series of insignias. This is over the South Polar region. Similarly, here they have them inverted U's that are one on top of the other. It's going like 700 kilometers into space. Now, these are not like rainbows or anything on Earth because there's no atmosphere. How are they doing it? This is all gaseous and it doesn't dissipate in time. They're just stagnant like that, So I don't know the technology. And then you find these same blue spacecraft in these areas. And maybe there is some sort of a spaceport or something in that region. I don't know. You have to do more research to find out. The other interesting thing that puzzled me was this scene. I wasn't expecting. If you look at the NASA's archive, there are like 200 to 300 of these slides the astronauts took over time. And each one of them had this circular arena in which these, what do you call those, arcs?
Like striations.
Yes. They may be, some sort of, I don't know, laser show or something. They have these spherical stuff. So they're using that to project these light shows to scare people away. In other words, which means that even before the Apollo program, there are human beings visiting the moon, which means they were using the old Vimanas or whatever, and then frequently traveling to the moon. So they may have gotten tired of them or whatever. They're trying to scare them. So I looked at it and looked at the bottom. It looks like, one of those.
It looks like a Chinese dragon or something.
Yeah, the Chinese dragon, or those Indian, it's got this otter-like thing in its mouth. And then it's got a tongue and this jaw, these claws, bulging eyeballs. I mean, this is not random art, this is somebody's projecting this stuff. I mean, the technology has been there for thousands of years, long before the Apollo mission, So what do you say to that, And then,
Yeah, I mean that's wild. I mean, that's
yeah.
yeah.
That's where I looked at the religious angle. If you look at the temple art, see these kind of look like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that
These are more
connection being drawn.
refined versions of it, but yeah, these look like Vimanas. This one apparently is a Vimana. They just put it on top of the temple after the thing was there. So we don't know, the technology, but things happen on Earth that we credit it to maybe gods or alien gods or whoever, not only from Hinduism, but for Christianity, for Islam, and for, the Zoroastrianism. They were all using the spacecraft to travel between different parts of the Earth. If you look at, recently they found in the Philippines, I think one of the Muslim businessman, he was dredging in the mountains for some sort of metals, and he found these are like yantras that Lord Shiva used. These are very ancient stuff. They're huge. And they were on top of a mountain. How could that be? I mean, he was traveling there. And there was also, if you look at even like a thing on Google Earth, I was looking a long time ago, there was this mandala, the mandalas that this kind of thing. There was one on Area 51. So they kind of fenced it up. That means that was thousands of years old. That means these alien gods, whoever were traveling back and forth, there was stuff in the Grand Canyon, in the caves that they found, and they put everything back in Smithsonian or wherever. And this is on Peru, those Nazca lines. This is a mandala. This was probably originated during those ancient Hindu gods who went to that part of the Mayan culture. And if you look at the moon, you have Franklin crater, which is it's kind of a bad image, but this is the only one that's available. And it looks like one of these Sri Chakras on there. It's faded, means it's very old.
Yeah.
So, how did it get there? That means the moon was occupied or being visited thousands and thousands of years ago. So if you had some sort of an archaeological team that would go to the moon and scout around, they might find relics, or they might find stuff on there. You might find even on Mars some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's why if you're
yeah.
an astronaut, you should be able to recognize some of these patterns. That's why I put that.
Yeah. So if you ever had the chance to take a trip to the moon or to Mars to do some sort of archaeological study on your theories, would you take that chance?
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I would love to I would love to sit on the Viking spacecraft, go on for years on end looking outside and see what's happening. It's a very fascinating, profession. In the future, a lot of the jobs will be generated by space programs, and they will need so many people that you may not have enough people on Earth to staff all those programs, because everything is related to space. I mean, you look at Elon Musk; he's shooting out one rocket every other day. That's a lot
Yeah,
of
that's
spacecraft.
that's yeah, I remember, 20 years ago, you hear someone shooting off 20 rockets, a month, and you're like, "Oh, is this World War III?"
Yeah,
But now, you hear 20 rockets every month, and you're thinking, "Okay, that's a slow month."
yeah,
And just the amount of change that the last, even 10 or 15 years has brought on has just been kind of really
yeah,
inspiring to see.
yeah. I mean, they came up with the Cape Kennedy because at that time in the Apollo program, there were maybe one or two launches a month. So the fact that it was a very rainy place didn't matter. Now, if Musk is launching every other day, yeah, it's going to be thunderstorm. You're going to have rain because it's not an optimal location for a launch site. You'd have to do that in some place like Namibia, or where there's really 5 inches or 10 inches of rainfall a year. But these
Yeah,
tropical areas, because they're on the equatorial regions, are advantages, but they also have heavy rainfall.
yeah, and that would be the only downside, I think, to launching in
Yeah,
that equatorial region, because at the equator, from what I understand, you kind of get a gravity boost in reaching orbital velocity because the equator of the Earth is spinning at a slightly faster rate
yeah,
than the poles.
yeah. It's a function of the latitude. So the angular velocity is the highest along the equator and the least in the polar regions. So if you want to launch from the polar region, which the Russians did, a lot of the high altitude launch site, Baikonur, they had to develop very heavy engines to make up for that loss. Whereas on the equatorial side, they're always launching it toward the east, because they take advantage of the angular momentum of the Earth. Sometimes you do launch in the opposite direction too, but the main attraction is every country wants to launch as close to the equator as possible. So if you happen to be like French Guyana or someplace ideally located, then you can generate a lot of business. Similarly, your parking sites for geostationary satellites, most of them are parked above the equator, 22,500 miles above the equator. So the locations of islands or countries on the equatorial regions are ideal for parking these spacecraft. That's what I don't know if they pay royalty or something for that, but yeah,
Yeah,
equatorial.
I would definitely imagine it would be a little costlier to get a low or middle Earth orbit satellite into place in a geosynchronous orbit in the equatorial region, because it's so much easier to achieve the geosynchronous orbit there, just due to the velocity of the Earth rotating being closer to standard orbital velocity in that region.
Yeah, I mean, it's the other thing is that's happening is we're launching so many microsats or mini sats, like weigh like 2-3 kilograms. You shoot them off, and you have this big network of GPS things that is just becomes a hurdle for spacecraft to travel through that because they easily hit you. If you're not, at some point it will happen. It's like a bullet striking, some spacecraft. It'll just destroy it.
Yeah,
So
and I know that's a lot of people's biggest complaint about Starlink is
yeah,
just because there's so many of them right now. Not only does it increase the chance of a collision during a future launch or attempted re-entry into the atmosphere, but it's also creating a lot more light pollution, misidentification of
mhm.
objects in the night sky. More often than not, now people think they're seeing UFOs, but they're just seeing a Starlink train going overhead. Um,
Yeah, this is. Yeah, I mean, there's so many explanations for different things because we don't quite understand the technology. Yeah, this whole Starlink is what they call a Kessler syndrome. They got so many satellites become a hazard. It's
yeah,
like,
and I know the last few months a lot of them have been deorbiting as well. I mean, it's gone from, I think, 5 a month about 2 years ago to, I think it was 20 to 25 a month just in the last like 3 months. It's just rapidly escalated.
yeah,
Luckily, they're small enough they can usually burn up on reentry, but it's still, I mean, always going to be a risk having that much debris in space. And debris can either be a functional spacecraft or, chunks of another one.
yeah. I think we need to. The other problem is all of these satellites tend to lose their position. So you have to keep firing thrusters to lift them back to that. So at some point, all these would, the fuel goes up, and then you don't have any choice. It will eventually re-enter the atmosphere. So it's a very kind of an expensive. You're better off with the geosynchronous satellite than these microsats. These are cheaper, but they're more problematic, I think, in the long haul.
Yeah, and it's like buying cheap pairs of shoes. You can
Yeah.
buy, 10 cheap pairs of shoes that, you'll go through in the time that it takes you to go through one high quality expensive pair. Um,
Yeah, same logic. It is, what do you Do you see the UAP connection here? I mean, there's one slide I want to show you. Oh, on the topic of the glass, this is another interesting slide. This is the same thing, except this is not a sheet of glass, but this is a dome. You can see the light reflecting on the surface of the dome. This is like maybe 200-300 kilometers, big, like a cake dish, Amazing that
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
build
no,
that.
that's
I mean, you get some contractors to build this. A guy go for 100 years, but they're able to build it so fast. I don't know how. It's a lot
yeah.
of mysteries, mysterious things. Then we have this more recent stuff. You've seen this green UAP and a lot of the defense videos. But
Yeah,
if
and
you
that
look at,
that one, that green one, I believe, is from a handheld recorder on the surface of a Navy ship in 2022,
yeah,
if I'm correct there.
but if you look at the moon, there were hundreds of these things. Near every crater you can find is in this. I blew this up. You can see one this way, one pointing that way. It's very similar to shape to this UAP. This is maybe in the 1968, probably. You know. Then I looked at several of these, and instead of putting hundreds of slides, I just summed it up into one slide. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 14 slides here.
Oh
All these
yeah,
UAPs are different shapes, different sizes. There's one here with a spacecraft underneath it. These are very old. So this has been going on for a very long time. So the UAP business is not something new. This has been going on for thousands and thousands of years,
yeah, and there's a video. I don't know if you've seen it. Let me see if I can find it real quick. But it was essentially like a long cylindrical UFO that
Mm-hmm.
was going into a crater on the moon.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, like this. Now there was,
Let me see if I can find it real
uh,
quick. Um,
yeah, I can show you one. Where is it? Yeah, I
yeah,
think.
because it looked very similar to like the slide that you're on right now, that kind of that mothership looking one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just seeing if I can find it real quick.
Yeah, there is a.
Well, I can't find that specific one, but eh,
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this long cylindrical stuff photographed over Mexico City, I think. Yeah, so
yeah,
these things can go vertically into a hole in the moon.
yeah, and that like the video that I found, I'm just gonna share it real quick. So we'll do okay. So I don't know if you've seen this video before, but I mean, just kind of this weird weird shape, just kind of slowly descending straight into the moon, and then you see the bottom one almost kind of morphs into that longer
I need to see it on
cylinder
the
shape.
screen.
Oh, there we go. Here.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so we'll start that video over so you can see it. But if you watch this, it starts as one object and then it almost splits into two or three.
Yeah.
And this bottom one right here just slowly starts descending, and this upper one is just hovering at the same height, and then it just disappears behind the moon. Have you ever seen that one before?
Not that particular one. Yeah, I've seen one picture where this cylindrical one was splitting like a Y-shaped, and I thought of including it in the book, and then NASA took it off.
Oh, figures. Of course they take all the good stuff down.
Yeah, so I mean, I have it, but it's no longer there in their archives. I mean, I downloaded it maybe 7, 8 years back,
Yeah.
So I have a lot of that kind of stuff. There's like, you wouldn't believe these cylindrical things. I counted more than 200 to 300 of them on the lunar surface.
That's
Yeah.
just an insane number. It's so hard to kind of grasp. Like, if each of those are like 10 to 14 kilometers long, like you were saying,
Hmm.
that's, figure 200, that's what, 280,000 or something of these things?
Yeah, I mean, the longest train on Earth is about 3 kilometers. So, like, this is way beyond. I mean, if you look at history, they'll say, oh, the entire Mayan civilization disappeared. Yeah, I mean, if you load them up into one of those huge spacecraft, you can put them into another parallel universe.
Yeah.
So we don't have that technology, but at some point, maybe 500 years from now, we may have that technology to make. The problem is like, okay, your International Space Station, which is only 450 kilometers away, you have to shuttle food and air every month or every 2 months. Imagine if you're traveling interstellar space. I mean, you would need a humongous spacecraft to load it up with supplies and air and all that stuff. That's why these things are so huge. They probably have entire families stacked in there. In other words, you'll be dead by the time you come back with half the family will be dead, because of this time warp
Yeah.
and all this stuff. So, yeah, I mean, as you're looking at, they're complaining about 6 months in lunar, I mean, in Earth orbit. If you're going to the Mars, you'll be away from home for maybe 2 to 3 years. You'll not see
Yeah, because
anybody.
it's what, like an average, what, like 9 to 14 month transit time to get
Yeah,
from Earth orbit to Mars orbit.
yeah.
And then not to mention the return trip, which would likely take even longer because you have to regain velocity.
And then there's probably a long waiting list of astronauts wanting to come back, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that's going to be a logistics nightmare in about 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get there, but to come back would be, like these ferries. You go on these island trips, you get so many people there that lined up. It's hard to imagine. So there's interesting stuff. But my thing that I lament most is we are doing all this space exploration, but we are not developing technologies to bring them back easily. I mean, the
Yeah.
ISS astronauts have been stuck there. They should have some sort of a life raft, or even a cruise ship has lifeboats. You having the spaceship must have some sort of a life, boat type thing that will glide them back to Earth without
Yeah,
costing
you
millions
would
and
have
millions.
thought that we would have learned after the
Yeah,
Titanic, 103 years ago now or something.
yeah,
I mean,
no, yeah.
it's make sure there's enough lifeboats for all of the passengers. It's basic sense.
Same thing on this ISS. I mean, you have to have, in case there's a medical emergency or something, you have to be able to download them from. If you're not able to bring them back from low Earth orbit, how are you going to do it from Moon? How are you going to do it from Mars? It's almost impossible. You know,
Yeah, I they should have started with planning on how to get people back before planning
yeah.
how to get people there.
Spend trillions or billions and billions of dollars, but simple things are never addressed
Yeah. Yeah,
because.
so I think we're getting pretty close to the end here for today.
Mhm.
But there's a couple questions that I'd like to ask you before we go.
Okay.
The first question is, what's next for you now that your book Mystic Moon: A Lunar Odyssey is out? Are you gonna move on to other reaches of the solar system, such as Mars or
Yeah,
Europa
I think
or stuff
Mars
like that?
would be of interest because there's a lot of, if there were ancient on the moon, they probably went to Mars, they probably went to other planets. There will be traces of their, I guess the word is vestiges of their visits. They would have left some structures, something, they've seen pyramid like things on Mars. So, yeah, there's that aspect, provided that data exists, and they don't keep deleting or keep taking it out of, public view. That's another issue. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the exploration of our solar system that is of interest
Awesome.
to me or anybody else. The other thing is, even if you take these yuga cycles, there's so much people working in genetics can learn from that. How are they modifying the genetics to dumb down these, sizes and intelligence and all these levels? So there must be some sort of switching mechanism that, yeah, some research can be done to kind of figure those kind of things out. Just like Einstein looked at, or Stephen Hawking looked at some of these ancient writings for understanding the universe. So there's a lot of ancillary benefits in hidden in these things that people should pay attention to. I think our famous astronomer Carl Sagan understood that very well. He had a thorough understanding of the Puranas and the time frames and all that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, Rao. So, a couple questions for you that I try to
Sure.
ask everybody. First question: what is your favorite food or meal?
I like to say my favorite food is pasta.
Okay. Any particular pastas or anything, like rigatoni or lasagna or something like that?
Yeah, I prefer lasagna the best.
Okay. And just because I understand that you are follower of Hinduism, do
Hmm.
you tend to go for like more like vegetarian type pastas?
Yeah, I think my family is all vegetarian, so I usually stick to vegetarian pasta as much as possible.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, I
Mhm.
enjoy one myself every once in a while.
Okay.
Um, and what would you say is kind of your guilty pleasure dessert?
Oh, I must say, as chocolate ice cream cake, that would be my favorite, I think.
Yeah, those are absolutely delicious. I actually just picked one up from the store just a couple hours
Mm.
ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a final follow up question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever personally seen a UFO, UAP, whatever you want to call it?
Not personally, because of the area I'm in. I used to live in a big city, and now it's Orlando is also a big city. No, I have not seen any myself, but I've seen a lot of clips in YouTube or the news, and so I've done that. Nothing one on one.
Well, your time is coming. I believe in that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm familiar with what NASA astronauts saw on the moon maybe 50 years ago, but they were there and they're still there, I think. And maybe they're actually coming to Earth from there. You know, it's only 284, 85,000 miles away, which is maybe a half an hour flight.
Yeah, at most. I mean, that's the speeds that they can go are
Yeah,
just absolutely incredible.
yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, I think, in the New Mexico area, you have a higher chance of seeing something like that, and maybe in Siberia or the Himalayas. So, I'm sure I'll be able to see it one day, but I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I think take as many trips to the ocean shore as you can and just
Hmm.
bask in the night.
Yeah, I'll have to do that. There's plenty of beaches around Florida, so that should be easy.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. But Rao, I just
Mhm.
want to thank you again for stopping in, and I really look forward to having you on next time. Once we get your next book out, and
Okay.
once NASA starts admitting to what they have hidden.
Yes, thank you, Ray. I enjoyed talking with you, and your show is outstanding. And wish you very best of everything in the future. I think you'll do a great job in your podcast. Thank you, and have a nice day.
You too, Rao.
Bye.
Everybody, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with Rao. I look forward to having him on again, hopefully after he finishes his next book. And, whether you agree with his theories or not, um, I still think that it's worth a listen because he does make some really good points. And I really think you should check out his book. Definitely worth a read. It's almost like a research paper, quite a lot of documentation of exactly where he got all of his information. So I definitely suggest giving him a good looking into. Um, and if you're watching the video on this and you notice there was a little bit of a change towards the end there, we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we were able to kind of rectify that for the last little bit there. So if you haven't already, please give the podcast a follow, a like, leave a comment, kind of let me know what you're thinking. And as always, thank you guys so much. I mean, I'm seeing people from all over the world, getting a chance to listen to this. So I really appreciate it. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day or night wherever you are.